Welcome to Dare to Lead, a Halian podcast, the show that empowers you to navigate leadership, career and business in today's dynamic landscape. I'm your host, Stuart Fry, Chief Executive Officer at Halian. On today's episode, we're joined by Helen McGuire, a pioneer in the diversity and inclusion space. She's achieved many things in her life, with most notably co-founding Diversely, an award-winning AI-driven DEI recruitment platform, which was acquired by the Access Group in 2023. A mother of three, Helen juggles her businesses, her book, The Purpose-Driven Business Handbook, and her podcast, The Digest. Now let's get into the episode. Hi Helen, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we dive into talking about your career, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, I mean, we were just talking about my cat that I've just adopted, so perhaps we should start there. No, my name's Helen McGuire. I'm the former CEO and co-founder of a business called Diversely, which was a diversity and inclusion tech platform, which is now integrated into Access Volcanic and Venturi, for those of you who are in the HR space. And I've been in the D&I space for over 10 years now. I'm a mum of three, so I always like to say that I kind of built my businesses at the same time as I was building my family. I live here in Dubai with my husband, but we've lived over in Singapore for a period of time now as well. So yeah, there's been a lot of travels, a lot of businesses, a lot of kids, a lot of stuff going on over the last 10, 11 years. But that business was acquired last year. And I'm now helping other founders build their businesses, as well as helping businesses like yours to improve their diversity and inclusion approaches.
That's fantastic. What were you like growing up at school?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah.
We've gone straight there, have we?
Gone straight for it.
Yeah, I think, I was reflecting on this actually, because I'm reading a book about childhood development at the moment, and I was actually reflecting on this recently. I was pretty quiet at school. I think I was probably, and I'm writing a book at the moment about my journey building a business as well as building a family. And, it took me back a bit to thinking about whether anybody in my classes at school, whether any of my teachers would have anticipated that I'd go on this journey, that I'd perhaps even leave the UK, that I'd build businesses and sell them and so on. And I think probably not, to be honest. I was always very diligent. I was always very, I'd always do my homework on time. You'd probably find me in the library on a Friday lunchtime getting my homework done so I didn't have to think about it over the weekend. I was that kind of kid. But I was always trying different things, and I was very sort of experimental. I never really ran with the crowd. I wasn't in with a particular crowd really until I was about 16. And I always did things a little bit differently and thought about things a little bit differently, I think. And I'm probably the only one of my friendship group, or one or two of us, who've left our home city of Coventry. So yeah, I would say I, was probably gathering a lot, observing a lot while I was younger. And that has kind of set me on this path.
Yeah. Great. Well, I was telling you a minute ago about my two daughters.
Yeah.
Who, two of my three daughters have started work with us today.
Yeah.
But I've got my youngest daughter who's starting to think about her A-level options and those things. And she said to me, when you were my age, what did you want to be? Because I was like, well, I definitely didn't think I'd be CEO of a workforce company or anything like that. And I actually wanted to be a vet.
Did you?
But I'm definitely nowhere near intelligent enough to
No,
be a vet.
that's the thing.
What kind of career did you see for yourself at that age?
I remember looking at, when I was probably about 14, 15, I remember looking at a billboard that we had at our school talking about careers in the media. And I think it was somebody from a local BBC station or something was coming into the school to talk about potentially being in the media. And I remember looking at that, and at that point, for some reason, I'd already discounted the fact that that was a possibility for me. So I'm not from a family, I'm from quite an entrepreneurial family. So my dad's an entrepreneur, my grandfather, my husband, all of his family as well. But for some reason, they were all born and brought up in the same city. So I'm originally from Coventry. And I never thought that was a possibility for me because I didn't see it. None of the women in my family were career women necessarily. They all had kind of part-time jobs, but they weren't career women. And so I think I went to university and I did geography and French at university because I didn't know where I wanted to go. But I had a lot of passions at that point. I was hugely passionate about music, and quite different music to the music that everybody else was into at that particular point. I was very passionate about horses. I was very passionate about languages. I was hugely passionate about the idea of traveling and just going to see the world and going to experience how other people lived their lives and how they lived their lives and what they did. And those are the things that eventually I followed, and those are the things that created my experiences now in many respects. The fact that I live abroad, I guess, but also my career in the music industry, which spanned about 12 years. I very much followed the things that I loved rather than thinking about where that would eventually take me, if that makes sense.
I play a game with my girls all the time, which is because we love Disney.
Yeah.
So we always say, if you're in America, favorite ride, favorite restaurant, who do you want to be with? Right. So for you, favorite band, favorite restaurant, and who do you want to sit down for dinner with? Ooh,
do you mean as in who would I want to sit down for dinner with in a, not like my husband or my kids?
Yeah, anyone in history.
Anyone in the world. Oh, they're three big questions. Okay, so favorite restaurant would probably be something Japanese, I would say. Or actually, you know what? I went on holiday to Italy with my husband about 10 years ago. And we were driving around Sicily and we rocked up on a beach. And there was just this incredible, we were hungry, right? And we just stopped. And there was this incredible little sort of shack on the beach. And you just walked in there. And it was not, it was nothing special. Yeah. But the food was incredible. The view was incredible. I will remember that meal to the day I die. It was something weird like pasta with sardines and tomatoes, which I wouldn't normally eat, but it was so delicious. And we both remember that. And so I think somewhere like that, not somewhere necessarily super fancy, but somewhere where you can sit down, get an amazing meal in unusual circumstances and not have to have all of the kind of fancy stuff around it. Person that I would sit down with. So I'm quite a big fan of space. Okay. I'm always watching kind of space. My husband will tell you. I'm always watching weird space documentaries, and I quite like sci-fi and stuff like that. And I'll read anything to do with space. Not that I'm a bit like you. Not that I'm smart enough to ever be in that field necessarily. But I think the person that I would love to sit down with, and I have met him before briefly when I was working in the media, is Professor Brian Cox, who is just a very different thinker in this space. Sorry for the pun. Who, has made some incredible documentaries, obviously, and just does some really interesting work, and is a very honest, kind of down-to-earth individual, and would just make a very, I think, compelling dinner partner to talk about that, but also just to talk about life stuff as well. I have a feeling he's got a lot of opinions. So I'd love to have dinner with him. And then what was the other bit of the question? Favorite band. So the weird thing with me about music is that because I was so intensely into music for such a long period of time, so I worked for BBC Radio 1 for about 10 years. So I travelled around the world. I was in studios with very famous musicians. I was on the specialist side, so more on the kind of dance music side of things. And I interviewed a lot of people that I very much admire. And since I left the music industry probably about 10 years ago now, and stopped DJing, stopped traveling with it, stopped, just refocused my attention into where I am now, I suppose, and kind of having kids and everything. My passion for music just sort of disappeared at the same time in a weird way. So I don't know that I have a specific band that I would want to sit down with. I still love, there are certain individuals, DJs who I still love. So Richie Hawtin is one that springs to mind, who is a techno DJ of kind of 30 years or whatever, Canadian DJ. And I've met him again, and he's a super interesting person. So I think if I had Richie and if I had Brian and me, and we were on that beach eating our pasta, looking at the sea or whatever, that would be a very interesting conversation.
So how did you get into your role now? Well, into your role after university. So you studied geography and French. You came out of university like a lot of people saying, "What am I going to do?
What do I do?" I went traveling for a year. So I left and I hopped around the world from sort of one side to another pretty much. And that really opened my eyes and completely changed my perspectives on things. And I think just going from that girl who was at school thinking, that is not for me, that's not a path that I could choose, I went to thinking, why can't that be for me? You know, why can't I chase these dreams and just run down every single possible avenue that I can to make sure that that's not for me or is for me. And so when I came back, I was very, very set on getting a role in the music industry. And I didn't really know what that looked like. I didn't know at that point that it would be in radio. But I'd always listened to radio. I've been pretty obsessive about it. My mum's a huge radio fan, so we always had radio on in the house. And I moved down to London. I worked at the Discovery Channel for a couple of years, doing some bits and pieces there. But I spent all of my spare time, either at radio studios, so learning, helping to produce. I kind of cut my teeth on John Peel's show, sadly kind of the year before he died. And I spent my holidays, my weekends, my evenings, I mean, you name it, I was doing radio stuff or music stuff. And eventually that opportunity came up about 2 years later at the BBC via a production company called Something Else. And I was over the moon. And so that's where I'd say my proper career started, you know, and I was about 24, 25, working on some incredible music shows, staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning in, you know, radio studios, putting those out live to the world was just my dream come true. And I absolutely loved it for years.
Must have been amazing.
It
really
was
amazing.
It was.
Was there a pivotal moment in your kind of radio background where you just thought, this is where I need to do something different?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I got to I left again when I was about 28 and went on a sabbatical, went traveling again to South America. So I did South America pretty much on my own for about 3 or 4 months, which was quite a scary experience. But, you know, necessary. I wanted to do it. It had been on my roadmap and I was just, regardless of the circumstances at that point in time, I just knew I needed to get it done. And so I went and did it. And it was incredible, but it was quite tough. And when I got back, I recognized that I'm not really a person that can do the same thing over and over and over again. I need a different challenge. So I was very happy kind of starting on a new show and pulling that show together and making sure that it was the best that it could be. But then I would get a bit bored of repetitively doing the same thing. And radio is quite a repetitive medium. You know, shows have their patterns and they have their ways of working. And once you're in that, you either accept that or you try and, you know, change it. And there's only so much you can really change. And I think also the lifestyle was tough. So I was traveling up and down the country. I was, you know, as I said, in radio studios till the early hours. And I was kind of getting to the age of 30 by that point and just sort of thinking to myself, where do I go with this? Because I don't want to be in management. That's not my vibe. That's not why I'm here. But equally, I don't want this kind of lifestyle because if I do want to have a family at some point, this is not going to work. You know, I just didn't see myself staying there for that long a time. So I started to look around and it was about 2008, 2009, so around the time of the financial crash. And I just started to think, look, you know, I need to find another way of using my skills. What can I do? How can I flip this into more of a business environment, to be honest. I think that's kind of what I was craving at that point. And that's when I left. I left at about the age of 30, and started in the advertising industry. And you know, loved that for a period of time as well.
Yeah. How do you juggle motherhood, successful career, building and selling companies, podcasts, writing a book?
Yeah.
How do you juggle all of that?
I mean, this is sort of partly why I've written the book, I think, is to work through that myself in a way. So what has the last 10 years been like? The reason that I started the company, my first company, was because of my daughter. I had my daughter in 2014. And I just remember thinking, I don't want her life to be like I'm seeing my friends' lives at the moment. You have kids and suddenly the doors are closed on your career, particularly here, right? Like 10, 12 years ago, the options around flexible working were literally non-existent. And I know there's a bit of a shutdown on the whole thing at the moment, but there is still at least the conversation and there are some expectations around it and an understanding. Here, there just wasn't at that period of time. And so when I looked at my daughter, I just thought, I want to do something that changes the future game for her, as well as making it easier for all the people I'm seeing that are dropping off the radar. And so about 7 months later, about a year later, actually, I started my first company, Hopscotch, here. And I think I didn't know what it would look like. And I think I say this quite a lot to women or to people who come to me who are thinking of founding a company or starting something, and they're overthinking it. And they're just thinking, how am I going to manage this? How you manage it because you have to. And if you're really passionate about something, you just make it work. It's as simple as that. I mean, I was lucky that I could then work from home quite a lot. So when I had my second baby, I had that flexibility. And I crafted it in a way that just worked for me. And I just knew I wasn't going to be a mum, and I was very unsure about this when I was pregnant, because my mum was very much a stay-at-home mum. Was I going to be a mum who could leave their career behind and who could just be, is this the point that's going to change me, when I have this baby? And it wasn't. I had the baby and I was like, I'm a bit bored. I need to use my brain in a different way. This is just, I can't just be this. There's so much more I want to do. And that's when the idea for the business kind of came along. And so from there, yes, there have been very stressful periods. A lot of difficulties in kind of moving around the world with a family, expanding the business when I was pregnant with my third baby, building a new business when I had kids who were under 5, None of that is easy. But when you're super passionate about something, you find the way of getting through it and managing it. And I wish I had some of the tools I have now to manage my stress, to manage my anxiety, to manage my time better, to manage my kids better, to be a better parent. And again, that's sort of why I've written the book, to put some of those things in there. Because if I had those things, it would have been a lot easier. As it was, I was flying blind and I was just figuring out as I went along. That's the truth. Especially
something like Hopscotch, because I remember when you launched, because I moved out here in 2009.
Yeah.
And, something like Hopscotch, it was new to the region completely. You see a lot of these startups and people who are entrepreneurs, but there's other businesses so similar to what they do.
Yeah.
That it's almost not like, blazing a new trail, whereas Hopscotch was something entirely new. No one had even touched that.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it one of those kind of experiences that is feast or famine, because it's either going to be massively successful or not take off.
I had no idea when we launched. So I was 7 months pregnant when we launched that business. And I remember getting into the office. So I shared my husband has a recruitment business here as well. So I'd get into the office, I'd share the office with him. And I remember just gathering all the materials, because I had a sort of press and advertising and marketing background. So I knew what I needed to do to make this work. Because as you say, it was such a new and different thing. And it's a double-sided marketplace for the founders out there. It's, you're building on the women's side, the community side. You need that. Those numbers to come in, otherwise you basically have no business. But equally, they're not the ones paying the bills. You need to go out to the corporates and make sure that you're matching on both sides. So it's a very hard juggling act. It's like any recruitment desk, to be honest. And so I got into the office. I remember sitting in front of my laptop and I had the press release ready to go. I had my press list. We had the website up, whatever. And I'm like, I'm just going to press send on all of these press releases to kind of 20 different outlets. And I do not know what the response is going to be. It could be just crickets. And I was overwhelmed. I mean, it was just, we could see people registering on the site like every minute. And there were just, by the end of the week, we had like 2,000 women. And I was like, what do I do with this now? Where do I put all these women? How do I handle them? As I said, I just went into it thinking, there's a problem here to solve. I'm not 100% clear on how I'm going to solve it. I have an idea, but equally, if I don't start, I'm never going to know. And it was just that process. And thankfully, it did take off when it was a success. Yeah. To a success in as far as it went, not enough of a success for me personally.
Okay, I think from my experience, what I've seen, I think it helped change the region. Not the region. Sorry, I think it helped change the UAE workplace.
Yeah.
Because it was, like I said, it was groundbreaking and so many people were talking about it.
Well, that's lovely to hear, because you never know what's out there in the market, really. Yeah. And you'll never hear all of those voices and all of those things, and you just carry on because you care so deeply about it, and you'll just do anything to make it work. Simple as that.
Yeah, I'm quite jealous because you've been to 60 countries.
Nearly.
Wow.
It might be 60 now. I haven't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a map with the pins on. I think I need a map with the pins on.
You should do. It's something you do with the kids one day.
Yeah, exactly.
All the places you've been
exactly. To. I know. They keep saying, "We're going to go to America soon," and I'm like, "No, it's too far."
Yeah. How do you think being to all those different cultures and places has really kind of helped forge your career and the way you view, business and the areas you're working in?
Massively, massively. I just think for a girl that was brought up in Coventry, who, the furthest I'd been, I mean, my parents were quite experimental on this stuff in comparison to a lot of their friends or whatever. So we'd always go on holiday in the summer. We were the first family that we sort of knew who went to America to Disney in Florida when I was 8, which I'll never forget. But we'd never been anywhere, tropical. We'd never been anywhere like India or the Far East or, whatever it was called then. I go home now and there is still that divide really between, I suppose, and my sister's the same, we've both travelled a lot, between what we've maybe been, seen and experienced versus what some of our friends and family at home have done. And it does change you massively. I mean, I remember the first time, as I said, I went travelling when I was 21. My best friend at the time and I landed in Mumbai, or Bombay as it was then called. And this was 24 years ago, whatever it is now. And we were terrified, absolutely terrified. I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, the poverty, the deprivation, the disabilities that you see on the street, the dirt, the children, that is not a particular part of Mumbai. That is everywhere. And you land from, having gone to Leeds University, being brought up in a middle-class house, just a whole different thing. And we were genuinely quite terrified. We were really worried for our safety, worried that we just didn't know what to do with ourselves. And I think you learn very quickly in those circumstances how to keep yourself safe, how you gain an enormous amount of empathy for the way in which other people are living. Just the very fact that you are born in a particular country with a particular passport gives you an enormous amount of opportunity and privilege that you do not realise until you perhaps go to some of these places. And you also realise, over and over and over and over and over again, travelling and living in different areas of the world, which I've been lucky enough to do, that everybody kind of wants the same thing. And everybody is, everybody wants safety, everybody wants comfort and love and the ability to express themselves and the ability to have their voices heard and the ability to gain the opportunities that they deserve. Everybody is the same. And so when you read the headlines, I don't read the headlines anymore, actually. I mean, that's probably the impact overall. I just don't read the headlines because I just think it is such a ridiculous way of interpreting the world. And until you're there on the ground, as living here, right? Yeah. The expectations of people who are in other parts of the world about this very city are so dramatically different to how it actually is for us or for anyone else living here. Yeah. And so you start to just understand that, there is more to it than the newspapers and the headlines and the expectations and the biases and so on, and get underneath that. I think that is the biggest lesson, actually. Yeah.
You're kind of a huge champion for diversity, equity and inclusion. What would you say your biggest motivator is?
Fairness. Just fairness. It's one of my biggest values. It's something that just really irritates me. And actually I kind of, again, going back to growing up, I have friends who I just think had so much potential and, it just, for whatever reason, it just didn't happen for them. They didn't fulfill what I think their potential is. Maybe I'm just projecting, but I think everyone could see that. And I just hate that. I hate seeing somebody who is not allowed to do or given the opportunity to do the things that they could potentially bring to the world. And I don't just mean business stuff. It's not just about money. It's not just about any of those things. It's not just about getting a job. It's just about being able to express yourself, express who you are. And I mean that in all of its glory, really. And that, that's why I love doing the podcast, just getting to the root of who those people were and seeing them go through those really difficult moments in their life where they were denied and where there were challenges and still coming through it and managing to be who they are. Yeah. I think that's remarkable.
I think being a parent as well, I look at my 3 girls and I think they're all turning into young women, and I just want them to have the same opportunity that everyone else has.
Yeah.
And we've really driven that in our business to get as much diversity across the whole of the company in all the regions we work in. And it is a massive driver, because I don't want them to kind of be put to one side or not get the same opportunities as other people. It's just not right.
I agree. And I think that does wakes that thing up in you of just like, I can see who this kid is, right?
Yeah.
Not the hair color and the school they went to and all of that stuff, but like who this person actually is and what they might be able to achieve in life. And so, when you take it down to that kind of perspective, and for people who, and I know, this is very much the case, and there is a bit of a backlash around DEI at the moment, for people who deny that and who just kind of say, we don't need to talk about this anymore. This is done, right? This is ridiculous. It's just the best person who should get the job. Well, good luck with that. Because if you look a certain way and if you act a certain way, then you are the best person.
Yeah.
But what about the person who doesn't? What about your elderly father who still has ambitions to do something in the workplace? What about your friend who has a disabled daughter who, is suddenly shut out of 50% of the opportunities because she's in a wheelchair or because she's visually impaired or whatever it may be? Take it down to the personal, and suddenly you start to get what the actual experience is.
Yeah, I think when you I hire a lot of people, and when you look at hiring people, sometimes I've interviewed people and said, actually, I'm going to hire you, but I'm not going to hire you for the job I've interviewed you for.
Yeah.
Because you've got so many skills outside of that that I could really use in the business.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people that hire just look at that black and white, what's on the job spec, what's on the page.
Yeah.
This is what we want. If you don't tick all the boxes, then no.
I think that's a really commendable way of looking at it, and I would completely agree with that. I think the CV, the LinkedIn profile, it needs a bit of a refresh, let's face it. And I think it is about people's skills, it's about people's experience. That's what diversity did. It sort of brought all that stuff to the surface so that you can make a decision on whether they could do the job rather than which school or university they went to, or what they looked like, or where they were from, whatever. And transferable skills are so vital in the workplace, particularly when you're talking about returning mums and things like that, I think, who have gained so many skills by leaving and by having to deal with stroppy 2-year-olds or 15-year-olds or whatever it may be. There's an enormous amount of value in those soft skills and in those areas, and taking that into account, and as you say, directing them into a place where they can thrive is such an amazing skill to have as a CEO, as a leader.
Yeah. By the way, they stay stroppy until they're at least 20.
Oh.
That's as far as my experience goes.
Right. Well, thanks for that.
Yeah.
That's really cheered me up this morning.
What do you consider the biggest hiring challenges for leaders in today's age?
It depends when and where we're talking about, I think. We tracked very closely building 2 businesses, I guess, that were based around recruitment, which was completely accidental. I mean, as we've said, I have 0 experience in the recruitment industry before I started my businesses. I'm lucky enough, in inverted commas, to be married to a recruiter. So I sort of have absorbed these lessons, I suppose, by osmosis, just hearing him on the phone and just understanding how the whole process worked. And when I wanted to solve the problem around diversity and inclusion, I knew that was the source, that was where to go, right? That's the first place to start trying to solve it. And so over the last 10 years, I've just seen the hiring, recruitment journey and hiring landscape just change massively. And I think because it's a space where you are really at the forefront of everything. So if there's an economic crisis or if there's an economic crisis looming, you are the first people to feel that, because people start to batten down the hatches, stop hiring, spending less money on that side of things, and start to promote internally or even kind of reduce their workforce. So it's always been a bit of a sort of wave to ride when you're then a supplier essentially into that industry. And I know right now it's a really challenging space to be for so many of the people that I've worked with and seen build businesses around this. My advice on this side of things really will always come from a diversity and inclusion perspective. And really it's to start looking at broadening your talent pool as much as you can. So rather than thinking down a particular route of somebody perhaps that you already have in the office or who've had in that position that would fit the bill, start to think a bit more broadly about what you need in the role, as you say, like what are the skills and experiences that that person needs to bring? Is it the case that they need 5 years experience, or is it just the case that they need to have achieved a certain level within their career? 5 years in someone's book can look very different to 5 years in someone else's book, right? It's not a measure of achievement to have spent 5 years in an industry or in a particular position. So start to think a little bit differently about how you might approach that, about how you might maybe even reword, and I know we've talked about this, I've talked to your business about this, reword the way in which you're putting yourself and your business across, both through your LinkedIn profiles, through your website, obviously, but also through your job ads. Is that appealing language to, let's say, women? Is that appealing language to racial and ethnic, different racial and ethnic groups? Is it appealing to those potentially with disabilities or with neurodivergence? Take a really good long look at that. That's exactly why we built Diversely, to take that bias out of those wordings so that you can increase the diversity of your talent pipeline. And the purpose of doing that is to help you to find the best person for the job, because if you're only looking in this direction, it's very hard to know whether somebody over here is actually going to be the right person. If you start to look a bit more broadly, then suddenly you're picking up talent that perhaps even your competitors aren't. So in a tough hiring landscape, that would be my recommendation. And I'd always really recommend looking at remote work, looking at flexible work, looking at hiring in your time zone as opposed to hiring in your kind of location. The UK is a really good example of this. It's pretty much on the same time zone as South Africa, for example. There is some incredible talent in South Africa. You may have to pay a little bit more than the market rate because they're working into a UK business, but it's still going to be not on a comparable level to paying somebody in the UK and then paying, the travel expenses and all the rest of it. So start to think a bit differently about how you can hire and how you can start to utilize skills and bring different skills into your business. And I think, give opportunities to different people, even kind of older people. When we were looking at hiring for Diversely, we took all of this into consideration, and our whole team was remote. We hired people from very different backgrounds. We had advisors who were, much older than we were, for example. And all of that wealth of experience, all of that kind of different background really brings a lot to a business, brings a lot of different perspectives. And I think, too many businesses are just quite cookie cutter about the way they approach this.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses, actually, it's, part of it, I think, is empowering the leaders who are hiring rather than having this binary process of recruiting.
Yeah.
Because those leaders are the people actually delivering those teams or those jobs, and the people above them are the people above them, but it's actually the people in there who understand what they need in their team.
Exactly.
And it's about empowerment as well.
I totally agree. Yeah, 100%. I think, as a leader in any organisation, I think if you're not giving your people the space to bring themselves to the table and bring their ideas to the table, you're really missing out on a lot. You're missing out on, I think, a lot of benefit that can be brought to that company. And that includes this kind of thing. Yeah. And I think, you also want to feel that when that person moves on, they've learned something from you. And they have the ability then to build their own team or to do their own thing or whatever it may be. If you're constantly spoon feeding them stuff and just telling them what they should be doing, what's the point? You might as well just do the job yourself.
Yeah. Well, I always joke because there's, I think there's 5 or maybe 6 recruitment companies in Dubai where the founders all started at Halian.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? And that's it. I think if you're arming your people with the right attitude as well, the right skills, and just giving them the confidence, to have that confidence in their own abilities and their own outcomes and
Absolutely.
Testing that, then it's a very, very good stepping stone to doing your own thing.
Yeah. Talking about diversity earlier, what's the future journey for it now? Because obviously you've exited the business.
Yeah.
That's, a really exciting time.
Yeah.
How do you see it moving from here?
So we were really lucky with Diversely. We hit a point where we knew we wanted to scale, but as a very small team of 10 people at that point, it was super challenging. We were in a very difficult investor landscape where angels were pulling up their drawbridges and, if anything, putting their capital into their existing investments to shore them up. So we're talking kind of 2022 coming into 2023 when we were looking to raise so that we could scale. And I don't know, people sort of forget that 2023 was a really weird year. Nobody could call it. Everyone was kind of like, it might be okay, but equally we might spiral into a really deep depression. We're just not sure. And it was just that kind of uncertainty that was stopping businesses from making big decisions and certainly stopping investors from chucking money into businesses like ours. That a bit like Hopscotch was very, very new. We were breaking ground. It wasn't like we had a roadmap to follow. It wasn't like we were doing something that someone else was doing. We were one of the first kind of D&I tech businesses out there. So we found it really tough to raise money. And so we started to think, okay, what are other options here? What does success look like for us? Because for me, success was never going to be CEO of an enormous business like Halian, for example. It's just not where I wanted to go with my career. I just wanted to solve this problem. And I knew that solving the problem meant getting this tech into the hands of as many recruiters as we possibly could. And so we started to look at our bigger partners, and the Access Group was one of those. At the time, we began exploring partnerships and ways in which we could help them to deliver our tech to some of their clients, helping them to understand a bit more around DE&I and the purpose of that for recruitment. But Access is a £9 billion company. It's enormous. Luckily for us, they are also incredibly acquisitive. So they acquire, I think, somewhere around 70 businesses a year. And a lot of that is some of that is in the recruitment space because they recognize how fast moving and how changeable that landscape is, as we were just saying. And so they were looking for a DEI solution. It was on their roadmap. When we knocked on their door, that door opened very easily. Not to say that the process itself was easy. It was not. It's incredibly difficult selling, what is, a 3-4-year-old business into a £9 billion company. But it was easy in a sense of we loved the team. They loved us. We all got on very well. We were fully aligned on how this was going to work. So Diversely now is not a kind of module that you pick off the shelf. It's not an added extra, which is exactly my fear around it. It is integrated into software. So it's part of Access Volcanic, which is website software for recruitment companies. It's integrated into Vincere as well, which you guys I'm sure will know.
Yeah.
And it's part of the process of that marketing team or that recruitment team doing their day-to-day work of attracting more candidates, attracting better candidates, delivering better for their clients. We've seen those stats go up massively. The businesses that are now using Volcanic with Diversely embedded within it have seen their rates of attracting new business increase by up to 3 times, just because of the fact that they know they can deliver on getting that talent through the door, on reporting on diversity and inclusion in their talent pipelines, on taking the bias out of their processes, on anonymizing CVs coming in so they're making decisions based on the right things, and essentially on just delivering better talent for their clients and getting better delivery rates as well. So it's been, so far it's just been an enormous kind of success story where that's concerned. I was very happy for that to be Diversely's new home. I know my co-founder felt the same way. And I think, we both got to the end of the sort of 6-month earn-out period, and we knew it was kind of going to grow across the business. Yeah. So within the division, but also potentially outside the division as well, which is the perfect kind of ending really for us as founders, and the perfect beginning really for Diversely in solving the problem that it solves.
Yeah. So I'm sure everyone wants to know what's next.
For me, so I'm still consulting into the Access Group and into sometimes businesses like yours, helping to improve diversity and inclusion, helping to make sure that it achieves the impact that it should achieve, and to make sure that the business is fire on all cylinders really where that sort of thing is concerned. So that's part of my time. But the vast majority of my time has been in, quite surprisingly to me, I've got to be honest, helping other founders now. So particularly those in the purposeful space who are either building a business or looking to build a business that makes an impact, a wider impact in the world. And I seem to have attracted quite a lot of parents, actually. So people who I suppose have seen my story on LinkedIn because I'm very, very vocal about everything that I've done. That's always been part of my strategy, really, for building businesses. And then kind of come knocking on my door and said, hey, I'm looking to do this, or I'm doing this at the moment. Can you help me? So I've started coaching, mentoring, doing some board advisory around that, and writing the book to support those founders as well. And the podcast as well will flip into that kind of a space. And hopefully we're doing an event in the near future to support those founders. So it's very much kind of being backstage and cheerleading, if you like, just helping them to cope with the stresses, the strains, giving them strategies, giving them kind of proven approaches to business, but also to coping with all of the stuff that goes around it in life, Yeah. And I did a Reiki accreditation over the summer. I did a cognitive behavioral therapy accreditation recently as well. And that's mostly to help me. It's not like I'm going to run off and maybe I will run off and set up a Reiki practice, who knows, in the future. That's not in my immediate plans, but it's more just to support, to get those extra tools in your toolbox to help you to move forward and gain success, whatever that looks like for you. And I'm really, really enjoying that.
Oh, great. Brilliant. Well, I really appreciate you coming in today. I've really enjoyed today's episode.
Thank you.
One last question.
Yes.
How do you dare to lead?
With risk, actually. Allowing people to have their own space, make their own decisions about what they need to do, giving them a very clear outcome that we need to achieve, and then allowing them to fail, really, and to make those mistakes and to learn from them. Because I think if you're constantly trying to teach somebody something and give them all of the answers, obviously guidance is very important, but giving them all of the answers doesn't help them to then solve the next problem for themselves. It's probably the way I parent as well, to be honest, so let's see how that works out. But yeah, I would say just giving people the space to figure these things out and use all of the reason that I've hired them, the reason that they're in the room in the first place, to get us to the next stage. Because if it's just my brain, then I know we're going to be a bit limited.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So nice to be here.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with Helen McGuire, where we discussed entrepreneurship, leadership, diversity, equity and inclusion, and more. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn at Halian, or visit www.halian.com to discover more. We can't wait to be back in your ears next month, so see you then.